my thing is the NIL, and I know. Listen, guys were getting paid. I know. You know it. I know. Everyone knows they were getting paid. Now it's legal to pay them. In baseball, in college baseball, it's kind of the same thing. Like, you look at the LSU's, you look at certain teams, they pay more and they're better than everybody else, and they get all these transfers. In college football, it's kind of seeing the same way as playing out, right? The halves are Alabamas and the Georgias. They're like, oh, you want to transfer to Georgia? Sure. Well, not only will we give you a starting position, we'll pay you whatever the dollar amount is. So, who is the highest paid player this year? Caleb Williams, the USC? Probably. Yeah. And then what can we do about it to balance it out? Because in baseball, it's killing the mid-majors. It's killing the non-Power 5 guys that have good teams traditionally, a Coastal Carolina, a Mercer, teams like that, because they get these guys out of high school. They might not be on the radar of these teams. They go and have a good year. Paul Skeens at LSU this year is going to be a top 5 pick. Was that Air Force, right? He transferred in. Tommy White, NC State, goes to LSU for money. How do we balance this out, not only in baseball, but in college football, to make it to where everyone can compete? Because at the end of the day, it's the same 4 or 6 teams every year that are in it.
Yeah, it's a concern. And I think all of us understand, if you go back to what NIL was built and designed to do, name, image, and likeness, right? I think everybody for years with college athletics was like, wait a second, how can a starting quarterback in Florida, like a Tim Tebow, not go out and benefit from being Tim Tebow? It just didn't make a lot of sense to us. And so they came up with this rule where you can now benefit from being a Tim Tebow. You imagine what he would have done when he was in school. So that's what the idea of it was. And now you've got collectives. Now you've got businessmen in all these communities and all these states that have different NIL laws in every state. There's nobody governing it. The NCAA has no power over it. So what's happening out at USC versus what's happening at Texas or LSU or Florida or Ohio State or Michigan, everybody has different rules within their state. The NCAA, after the Supreme Court smacked them around, said, don't ever, come back to our quarters, or we'll really get after you. They kind of went like this: we're out. So now you have basically the conference commissioners who all have their own agendas based on their constituents, their presidents and ADs and coaches and fans. So what Greg Sankey and the SEC are doing, they're not worried about what the Pac-12 is doing or the Big Ten. He's worried about his map, his fan base, right? And so how do we move forward when we don't have one person like a Roger Goodell or Rob Mandarin or somebody polling for college athletics? We have a bunch of different people with their own agendas. So I don't know how we're ever going to come to an answer on this unless the federal government, which they have obviously more than they can handle already. So I really don't think I could sit here and tell you this is what's going to happen. I don't think anybody knows. But to bribe a high school player to come to your school and pay him X amount of dollars when he hasn't stepped foot on the campus or played a game is asinine to me. To take a guy at Air Force or some small mid-major and out-duel whoever else is trying to recruit him away from that school is not what NIL was about. So it's a disaster right now in intercollegiate athletics. And the only answer to me is to pull out of the NCAA, somehow create, kind of like MLB and NFL does, create a players rep or a players organization. I don't know if it's a union, but something that reps the players, and then find the conference commissioners decide on one leader, and then they negotiate and they come to terms on NIL, and they come to terms on recruiting, and they come to terms on what's a rule and what's not a rule, and then they enforce those rules, and they break away from the NCAA, and you don't have to worry about antitrust laws. You know what I mean? I think that's the only thing you can do to take the power back, because right now there are no rules, there's nobody in charge. So coaches and these collectives are doing anything and everything to gain an advantage. And as you said, it's going to who has the most money. And that's not what sports are all about. I'm all for players getting paid, but I'm all for players getting paid when they make a name for themselves and they can earn that money based on how they're performing on the field or on the basketball court or whatever it might be. So right now it's a disaster, and I'm terrified when you throw NIL and transfer portal in together. Players aren't learning the value of going through tough times. They're not going through those 1 or 2 or 3 years of just, man, I'm in a hole. I don't know how to get out of it. And then they dig themselves out and they learn the valuable life lessons. First sign of trouble, they're gone, and you add all that up, and it's a different time in college athletics, as we all know. And I hope they pull out of the NCAA and create their own governing body. I think that might be the only answer.
No, I like that. And it's almost like, hey, create a pro sports league, right? I mean, that's what you're doing there. Essentially, it's been a pro sports league for years. Just actually make it official and build it up that way, like we have in MLB, NFL, etc. So I want to finish with the tie-in here with baseball and football. So he'll be back on tomorrow. And one of our friends on the show, Whit Merrifield, who's on the Toronto Blue Jays, went to South Carolina, huge SEC football fan. He told us that when he joined the Blue Jays, which play in the AL Beast, as many call them now, it's the best division in baseball, most would say. He said many people told him, like, welcome to the big leagues now. This is the SEC of MLB. So do you agree from what you've seen? And is that what you're talking about when you say, hey, there's these powerhouse clubs? Although I will say, like, Baltimore is in there, Tampa Bay's in there. They're not necessarily spending more than anyone. It's just that all those teams are stacked.
Yeah, I mean, I think you're always going to, in Major League Baseball, I mean, it's such a long season, as you guys know. I mean, there's an ebb and flow to a season, and things start to kind of even out, and the cream rises, and the best teams eventually emerge. But yeah, I mean, the SEC in college football has been the king. I mean, the depth and the teams that go on to win the championships speak for themselves. It is what it is. I think on top of that, I mean, AJ can speak about the Swamp as one example of the atmosphere that you walk into. I could just tell you, as watching the Reds play the Red Sox, the Reds atmosphere sadly is like a morgue when you watch a game in Cincinnati. Maybe that'll change now that they're playing better and they got Milwaukee coming in this weekend. But man, I cannot help, even with the Reds up in the 8th and 9th inning, the energy in that building at Fenway. They almost came back. I think the Reds were up by, I don't know, 5 or 6, 7 runs in the 9th inning, and the Red Sox and their fans almost willed them to a victory. And that did remind me of an SEC kind of thing, where even when they're out of it, their fans come back and make a difference in the game. And you have so many behemoths in that division with the history and the tradition of guys like the Yankees and the Red Sox. But it is fun to see the Rays, who somehow have figured it out. They've got the cheat code on how not to spend money and how to compete every single year. And I find it refreshing, going back what the AJ said earlier about college football, same for when you see teams, like Baltimore get up there, and just some new faces and new teams that kind of get you excited about some fresh faces trying to make a run.